And to talk about that much talked about spat between J.D. Vance and Donald Trump on one side and Volodymyr Zelensky on the other at the Oval Office about 12 hours back, I'm joined by Professor Harshvardhan Pant, Vice President, ORF. Professor Pant, thank you very much for joining us on the show. My opening question to you is, why did Trump have to do it the way he did it?
I think, Amrit, he himself summed it up in one sentence. He said it's great television. And I think a lot of this is that he allowed the fact that the President of the United States allowed such a spat to continue in his office for such a long time is quite extraordinary. But it also, I think, goes straight to how Mr. Trump likes it. He could have stopped it at any minute. He could have made a dignified exit from that any minute. He could have converted it into formal negotiations any minute and shut it off. He decided not to do it because I think he felt that this is great theater. This is also, I think, in some ways what he said, that people should know it. That I think he was also appealing to his base in some ways with this, that look, this is the difference between American position and the position of Ukrainians who are not willing to compromise. You have elected me for a purpose, and therefore I am trying my best to end this war. But here you have Ukraine that is not willing. So I think in some ways he was doing two things. He looked at it as a great spectacle, but perhaps more importantly, he was by making it public. He was ensuring that that the differences that are there between Washington and Kiev would be out in the open, so that later on, when you have a restart of this process once again, he would be on a stronger wicket to therefore demand that we start from this premise rather than the premise of the past. So I think he has laid out the groundwork for the next stage as well.
Professor Pant, we'll come to the meat of it, or the substance of it in a moment, that what he said and what Zelensky said and what were they angling. But why the theatrics? It looked like a setup into a trap into which poor Zelensky just walked in. Let's look at it from the beginning. When Donald Trump comes out at the door of the White House to receive Zelensky, he takes a dig at him. He says right in front of the media, I've been there. There is a photo opportunity there, but he makes it loud and clear. Look, he's dressed appropriately for the meeting. So he takes a dig at him. Zelensky clearly is uncomfortable. Then they walk in. It looked like almost a trap. So why did Vance and Trump have to be so aggressive? If they had a point, they could have done that, as is done in diplomatic parleys, behind closed doors, and said, well, this is our stand. That's how the give and take diplomatic negotiations take place. But why make statements that you've been disrespectful, and why that finger pointing kind of slanging match that took place?
See, it is clear that they, the Trump team, Trump-Vance duo, don't like Zelensky at all. And I think the point that was also made by Vance, that look, you were campaigning for the opposition. So I think there is also an element of that he was behind.
So it's domestic, the hate of the domestic politics coming into this.
See, everything for Mr. Trump is domestic politics. For all politicians, local politics matters. But for Mr. Trump, because he takes personal, insinuations, personal attacks very, very seriously, he never forgets that, who has been behind him, who had been against him. And I think he carries it along. So in that sense, I don't think there is any serious attempt on the part of the Trump administration to resolve the conflict. They do want to end it, at least the active phase of war. But I don't think it is meant as an exercise where both sides are deemed to be equals. Look at the posture vis-a-vis the Russians. When American diplomats, Marco Rubio sits with the Russians in Saudi Arabia, look at that posture. Look at how he has talked about the Russians, about Putin himself. And look at how he has talked about Zelensky from the very beginning. He seemed to be turning that back yesterday or day before. When someone said that you have talked about Zelensky in this manner, he said, "Did I do that? Maybe I should not have." But I think clearly he has been targeting Zelensky from the very beginning, and a lot of it is about, look, you are not with me, so therefore you must be against me, and therefore what I will give to you will be something that will be on my terms.
Okay. All right. Now let's come to the substance of it. If you look at the whole video, that 49-minute video, where things start going bad is when Zelensky says, we're ready for the deal, for the mineral deal, but we want security guarantees. That is when things go south. He says, well, you can't, you're losing it, you don't have the cards, and then he starts calling him things and saying you are gambling with World War III, basically telling him that you're in no position to negotiate. You're a weak man, you're losing soldiers on the ground. And Vance tells him that, where Zelensky responds back saying that, have you ever been to Ukraine? Have you been on the war field and had to have a look at for yourself? Which, J.D. Vance says, well, I've heard and I've watched, etc. So clearly, if the Americans are not interested in getting the security guarantees from Putin, or if they can't secure them from Putin, why make a spectacle? They should have just behind closed doors told him that, well, at the moment Putin will not agree, or we are not in a position, or we are not interested in getting the security guarantees. These are your limited options. Here you stand. We are not going to back you more with American taxpayer money. We are not going to pour that money. Why make a spectacle out of it? That's what I'm trying to understand. I mean, apart from what you say, that his personal grudge against him for supporting the previous administration.
See, I think, in some ways that is Mr. Trump's style also, that look, he makes a lot of things public. Now, the clever politicians, those who have been able to manage him, if you see, for example, how Mr. Modi managed him, or how just recently Emmanuel Macron or Starmer, British foreign prime minister, managed him. There is a way to handle him. There is a way to sort of take a step back and and absorb some of those blows. But I think here, obviously, for Zelensky, and I have some sympathy here for him, that look, it's you are fighting a war, right? People are dying every day. So to be told that, look, you don't hold any cards and you are weak, and when a country, we can disagree about the sources of the conflict, but the fact that a smaller country like Ukraine has stood up to Russians for 3 years, it is itself a remarkable achievement with all the help they have been getting here and there. But at the end of the day, Ukrainians themselves are holding the fort. So I think so therefore I think it became emotional for Zelensky. But I think a cleverer politician perhaps would have handled those blows much better initially when they were coming, and perhaps veered Mr. Trump away from this public posturing, which I think others have done. If you see how others have handled him, who have been successful, they have absorbed some blows. They have said, all right, let him speak what he wants to, but we will the substance we will talk behind closed doors. Here, Zelensky was, he came out into the open. He just couldn't take it anymore, and I think that's where things became awry, and the sort of everything became public, and everyone came out.
So it was a setup, and poor Zelensky walked into the trap.
Fell for it. I think it was. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, in fact, if you look at it from Zelensky's point of view, all he was arguing was for security guarantees. When he said that you're now in position, so he said it started way back in 2014. President Obama was in office. You were in office. He told Donald Trump to his face, you were in office. Then Biden came into his office. All these, peace talks happened then also. But he walked into Crimea, then he again walked into my country. So if there are no guarantees, what kind of a peace are we talking? So he does have a point there.
Amrit, it's a very important point, because that's the point perhaps that that would have been very hurtful for Trump. Someone who thinks of himself as the savior of the world. Zelensky told him that, look, the conflict's origins actually go back to you and to Obama. So in a sense, it was also perhaps a bit tactless of Zelensky to do that at that point, because he was coming to close a deal. Now he was telling Trump that, look, the fault is also partly yours. You allowed this to happen. Now I think that would have hurt much more in some ways for Trump to acknowledge and accept that if you recall, he immediately came back. He said, look, Obama was not giving you anything. I gave you javelins. I gave you this. I gave you that. Which is true. But the fact of the matter is that because Americans did not stand up to Russians at the right time, the situation went out of control, and Putin believed that they would not, and American would not support Ukraine, and therefore he went all out. So I think, there is so much personality-driven politics or personality-driven posturing happening here that it's very difficult to divine the strategic logic behind what has happened.
Yeah, someone very interestingly and rather sarcastically remarked today that who says personal chemistry does not affect international relations? Professor Pant, now the question is, where does it go from here? Where does it put the whole peace deal that was being talked about between the Americans and the Russians? What does Trump get Putin to commit to?
I think we are in a bit of a limbo at the moment, and I think the choices are for Mr. Zelensky, I think, are pretty serious, because either he steps down and allows someone else to work with the Americans, because I think in his present position it would be very difficult for him to make that move, or there is an element where perhaps behind the closed doors Europeans use their leverage.
In fact, they're meeting in London tomorrow, and Zelensky is meeting Keir Starmer later tonight. I mean, their evening. In fact, I wanted to ask you that what is Starmer likely to tell tell Zelensky, despite the public posturing and despite publicly supporting him?
I think all the Europeans, I mean, you would have seen there has been a strong show of solidarity for Zelensky from Europeans, because I think ultimately the question that has to be asked for any kind of a peace talk is that this conflict is about the future of the European security architecture. It is not about Ukraine and Russia per se. It is about how the post-Second World War order that was post-Cold War order that was created, that has come unstuck, and how that needs to be rebuilt in some ways, where the legitimate interests of both sides, Russians and the Europeans, have to be taken into account. Ukraine is just one aspect of that. So I think Europeans are really worried, because on one hand, Trump is hammering them on NATO, on the other, he's hammering them on Ukraine. Now, Europeans, I think, will have to do some amount of clever diplomacy here, because they can use whatever leverage they have with Trump to restart the process, because otherwise Europeans in and of themselves do not have the wherewithal to either deter Putin from doing what he's doing on the battlefield, or to ensure the kind of security guarantees that Ukraine wants can be provided, because Ukraine ultimately would want the American imprint on those guarantees. So I think some ways behind the scenes, perhaps the message to Zelensky would be that he should mend his fences whichever way he can. But Europeans themselves need to pull some weight here, because ultimately it's the question of their security. Americans don't have, in terms of hard security, nothing else to play. Now, I think one of the ways in which perhaps the engagement can continue is to use the same arrangement, that minerals arrangement, that was the minerals deal that was supposed to be signed between Ukraine and Trump.
And Zelensky is making the right kind of noises when he was asked to. Actually, he didn't walk out of the White House. He was asked to leave the White House. Trump apparently refused to meet him, and he told Marco Rubio that tell him to go now, and he was told to go. But after that, he goes on to, before he leaves the US soil, he goes on to that Fox News interview, where he says, I came here to sign the minerals deal. I'm ready for that. And then he tweets that I'm thankful to the American president, to the American public, to the American Congress. So he's making those kind of conciliatory statements.
Well, Amrit, that might be sarcasm as well. Thanks to POTUS and because he was asked to say thank you so many times by Vance. But I agree. I think he has, because he has no other option. He has to for the Ukrainians, he has to deliver. Although interestingly, if you perhaps some of the reports that are coming from Ukraine, they are very categorical that Ukrainians have really rallied around him at this point. Even the opposition is rallying around him. But I do think that minerals agreement remains one of the most interesting and important aspects to restart and re-engage with the US at this point, because that's something that Trump likes, and he wants to conclude that agreement.
True. So Trump wants that. Zelensky's got limited options. Europeans don't have the kind of money or wherewithal or even the resources to get Putin to agree. So this will have to come, but this has thrown a spanner in the works for some time at least. But things could get back to track sooner or later. Professor Harsh Vipant, that's all the time we have for scintillating discussion. Would I love to carry on? We'll come back to it another day. Thank you very much.